Hello, everyone. My name is Colin Rhinesmith. I'm an assistant professor of social and community informatics at the School of Library and Information Studies at the University of Oklahoma. It's a real honor to be here, a real pleasure to be with you all into the later hours of the afternoon before the coffee break. But what we're going to do today is first we'll define what is digital inclusion. We'll try to think about that within what we've heard already. And I think really what we've been asked along with other panels is to talk a little bit about the state of the field in terms of digital literacy and inclusion. And I would agree with the other moderators that have come before me that I think we've heard many examples already about the state of the field in digital literacy among different populations. But I think what our wonderful speakers today will be able to provide some additional examples, additional perspectives from their work that will contribute hopefully to a more full conversation and understanding of digital literacy and inclusion. So we will talk a little bit about current state of the field and continue on to talk about the challenges and gaps that will hopefully lead us to an exciting conversation about recommendations. We will, unfortunately, we are missing one speaker who I will address in a minute. I will introduce in a minute. But we have some other people in the audience who could also speak to Susan Feller's work in tribal libraries, so that'll be a good addition. So excuse me. So let me begin by introducing our speakers who are here. To my left is Ruth Small, who is Laura J. and L. Douglas Meredith Professor of Information Studies, the I School at Syracuse. She's founding director of Syracuse University's Center for Digital Literacy, which is an interdisciplinary collaborative research and development center for which she has earned more than $6 million in external funding, including being PI or co-PI on 13 IMLS funded projects over her 26 years on the I School faculty. And these projects include SOS for Information Literacy, which was named to the first list of AASL's best websites for teaching and learning, and Project Enable, which we'll hear more about today, which Enable stands for Expanding Non-Discriminatory Access by Librarians Everywhere, a project to train librarians nationwide in ways to provide accessible and inclusive libraries and library information services, programs, and resources. And next, to my more immediate left, is Dwight McInvaill, who has served as director of the Georgetown County Library of South Carolina since 1996. He was educated at Presbyterian College, where he received his bachelor's, and at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he received his MLS, and at the University of Bordeaux in France, on a Rotary Foundation scholarship. So his focus as a public librarian is on providing innovative and effective services for the benefit of his community, which he will be talking more about today. And to achieve that aim, he likes trying, in addition to traditional methods, a mix of other approaches, which are very exciting and we'll hear more about today, including interactive gaming to encourage teen literacy, oral history videos to strengthen community spirit, digital arts instruction to stimulate creativity, digital dissemination of historic images and documents to preserve and share stories, cooperation with other agencies to prepare citizens for natural disasters, and the list goes on, let me tell you. Very exciting, so we're looking forward to hearing more about Dwight's work. So unfortunately, our third panelist who couldn't make it, Susan Feller, is president and CEO of the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, ATOM. We do have, in the back of the room, we have a very exciting report that came out in 2014 that's in the back of the room that Mary Alice Ball is holding up back there. It's entitled Digital Inclusion in Native Communities, the Role of Tribal Libraries. And there's some pretty incredible findings from this report. I'll include some of, it's unfortunate she couldn't be here. The reason why is unfortunately with all the terrible storms in Oklahoma, a tree fell through her roof. So it was really, really awful. And she had to turn around after driving up yesterday, as I did from Oklahoma. She had to turn around today and address that problem. So we're really sorry she couldn't be here, but we do want to include some of the remarks that she did prepare today. So I'll include some of those in the time that we have. So this is who we are, this is what we're doing. But let's talk a little bit about digital inclusion and what's the difference between digital literacy, digital inclusion. There's also this thing called the digital divide, and all of them are important. And so what I'd like to do is just to read one bit of a page from the Building Digital Communities report from the IMLS that came out a few years ago. I had the honor of being involved in the working group to put together that report. And so here the IMLS states, or asks the question, what is digital inclusion and why does it matter? The report begins by saying that digital inclusion is the ability of individuals and groups to access and use information and communication technologies. Digital inclusion encompasses not only access to the internet, but also the availability of hardware and software, relevant content and services, and training for the digital literacy skills required for effective use of information and communication technologies. The cost of digital exclusion is great. Without access, full participation in nearly every aspect of American society, from economic success and educational achievement to positive health outcomes and civic engagement, is compromised. Now lastly, what does digital inclusion mean for people in a community? So specifically, digital inclusion means that all members understand the benefits of advanced information communication technologies. All members have equitable and affordable access to high-speed internet-connected devices and online content, and all members can take advantage of the educational, economic, and social opportunities available through these technologies. So what we want to do today to begin, as I said before, is we'll turn it over to the speakers here to include some comments on what they're seeing within their own work and also other examples that they find to be exemplars or models that we should discuss that haven't been announced already today, and begin a conversation from there. So I'll start with Ruth, please.
Thank you. Back in 2006, and this is a little history leading to the answer to this question, my answer to this question. I received an IMLS NLG, National Leadership Grant, to do one of the school library impact studies, specifically in New York State. It was a multi-research method study using in-depth surveys, general surveys, focus groups, and case studies in 1,600 school libraries in New York State. And one of the questions that we asked in that study of those 1,600 plus librarians was, of all of these different tasks that are normal tasks for a school librarian, how do you rate yourself in terms of your ability to perform them? We had things like collection development and providing information literacy instruction. We had several, probably I think 15 or 16 different tasks. And by far, we were actually startled by this result. 84%, a statistically significant difference from all of the other tasks. 84% of the librarians that responded said they felt not adequately prepared to serve students with disabilities. So we explored that in a little more depth that was in the first general survey. So in the in-depth survey and then focus groups and case studies, we explored that in a little more depth and found that not only did these librarians not receive this training in their pre-service programs, but when it came time for programs, professional development programs in their schools, they were left out of the loop. Those programs were for teachers and not for librarians. Another case of librarians being left out. So we saw this immediately as a high need, and we were very lucky to receive in 2010 a grant, a Laura Bush 21st Century grant, to do something about that. And Project Enable was born. And we've had 3 successive grants to support Project Enable. So what is Project Enable? Well, It's a program to train train librarians. We started with school librarians to provide accessible libraries and inclusive library programs and services. So we originally started with focused on New York State school libraries and school librarians using face-to-face training. We quickly saw that this was not going to be fast enough nor give us enough coverage to cover the need. So we asked for another grant from IMLS and got it to expand Project Enable to school librarians nationwide. At that point, we quickly found out from other surveys that we conducted that academic and public librarians felt exactly the same way. They were not prepared in their pre-service program, and they do not have adequate professional development to feel that they are capable of doing what we've asked. So we expanded again and got another grant from IMLS to expand to public and academic librarians, basically all librarians, and nationwide. So Project Enable, in its third iteration, became an online program so that we could reach more people faster. It provides foundational, customized, free training to librarians. We only ask that they register, and we ask that so that we can customize it. It contains 5 self-paced learning modules on disability awareness, laws and policies, accessible libraries, inclusive programs and services, and assistive technology. And the URL, in case you're wondering, is projectenable, one word, .syr.edu. And Project Enable is multimedia. It includes interactive exercises, quizzes and tests, games, webinars, and all kinds of other information. It's actually kind of fun to go through these modules, and they're quite comprehensive. You can pick and choose what you want to do. It's self-paced. But one of the other things that we have customized is that you can go through Project Enable as an individual at your own pace and looking at what you want, or you can go through it as a group. And what I mean by that is if a faculty at a university wants to have their students go through Project Enable or part of Project Enable, they can register that group and monitor their progress. If a library director or a professional developer or trainer in a library system wants to have their staff or part of their staff go through Project Enable, they can do that as well. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you participate. Today, since we launched the Project Enable online training, we've had 1.4 million visitors and over 1,000 participate in our training. We're currently doing some pilot research, and actually this fits in well with the last presentation because we started with research and Project Enable grew out of the research that we had done. And now we're conducting research on Project Enable and its impact by collecting personal stories as evidence of impact on not only on librarians and libraries and library practice, but also on the people they serve, the people with disabilities. We're actively involved also in 2 other related IMLS funded projects. One in Illinois at the Illinois State Library called Targeting Autism, and another in Florida through Florida State University, Project PALS, which is a project to train librarians to provide services and resources to children with autism. So that's Project Enable, and we feel that that is what is called inclusive digital literacy, where we are training librarians to be able to provide all of their services, all of their programs to all of their patrons.
Great. Thank you, Ruth. So actually, I forgot to say that we're going to try to make this actually more of a conversation, interactive among the three of us, so that hopefully by the time that we're saying what we had prepared, that we can open it all to you and have that be continuation of the discussion. So, so now we will turn to Dwight, and Dwight, please.
Colin, thank you so
Mhm.
very much. Also wanted to thank the IMLS for this opportunity. And a place where you don't have large budgets, you don't get out very much. And so it's very good to be with you. I feel a bit like Allison as well. You recall that she talked about how so many ideas are buzz in the room. Well, I'm just seeing neurons shimmering everywhere. And so it's a bit distracting. And also, you'll have to forgive me. As a Southerner, we never talk in a direct line. And it's a problem. And I do know the timekeeper. He's not going to cut me any slack. So let me proceed and try to do so in a direct way. We've been asked to talk about successful models and then challenges and gaps. And I've been dazzled listening to Ruth talk. She is so very, very passionate about working with people with disabilities. And Colin, as well, is a wise man. He's wise beyond his years. And I'm between them. The model that I'd like to talk about, I'd like to first talk about two academic models, one of which influenced me a good number of years ago, perhaps a decade ago. And it was a Da Vinci Institute study on the future of libraries. And it talked about what is a library going to be like once books are gone. And it said, you know, you need to concentrate on the latest technologies. You need to concentrate on good space for people to do things. And you need to find out what's at the heart of your community. And so that's what I've used. And in addition to that, of course, another very good grant, I want to talk about it, and then later when we do the challenges and gaps, go into it in more detail. But it's by Sin and Kim. And 2008, I wish that it could be replicated, and maybe it can be with new data. But the title is, get this, Use and Non-Use of Public Libraries in the Information Age, a Logistic Regression Analysis of Household Characteristics and Library Service Variables. But it's a terrific, terrific report. And it does identify those groups that are disadvantaged. And then it also talks about specific obstacles. So when we get to that portion, I'll go into that in more detail. The model that I'm going to use is my own library. I actually had a list of others, and pretty much they were covered during the previous presentations. I'm looking at the gentleman with the wonderful white mustache on the third table. Wonderful program, and others, of course, as well. We have at my library, which serves 60,000 people and has about 30 full-time equivalent employees, we have a digital archives librarian, we have a digital arts librarian, we have a teen tech librarian, we have a Hispanic librarian, we have a cultural programming librarian. None of them, well, one of them is an MLS, so we'll talk in a little bit about gaps. We have achieved a lot. We have a digital library with 42,000 items. We were the first digital library in South Carolina. We helped to found the State Digital Library and other digital libraries. Our digital arts librarian has interviewed many, many people. She's created 800 oral history videos, and 200 of those are online, and those 200 are accessible through our digital library. The teen tech librarian has created a program that involves interactive gaming and coding and app production with teens across the county. Our Hispanic librarian, we've just started with that. We had a terrific Hispanic fair, our first fair. We have instituted a collection of Hispanic materials. We've created a community team to deal with Hispanic issues, because South Carolina, 5% of our population already is Hispanic. And then I just had a cultural programming library, and I established that just after John Palfrey, who I love, said something to the effect that viewing the library as a community center isn't a very good idea. But then I was able to read that last night and understand more about what he was saying, that we have a certain brand and that we have very good strengths that go beyond that. How am I? Okay, good. Okay, very good. I did want to talk about one project that we've recently done that's grown out of all of this, and it's our Out of the Rice Fields project. And Georgetown County, for about 200 years, 90% of the population was enslaved. And it was a major rice-producing area of the South. And the problems echo to this day, along with the opportunities, because a very beautiful culture was formed called Gullah culture. And, but the problem is, of course, it's been impacted over time by a variety of stresses. And so we decided in Out of the Rice Fields, we got 3 grants, or really 3 funding sources, to do the following. We met with artists, and we found out, would this be of value for them to be highlighted as Gullah artists and cultural leaders? We did that with the South Carolina Arts Commission. Then we applied to the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we got a grant to actually interview them and to have a series of lectures on Gullah topics, from music to art to all kinds of wonderful things. And then we worked with cultural agencies up and down the coast of South Carolina to form a team to create the Rice Forum 2015, which will be a 3-day event which will occur in September. And we're going to have the premiere of our Gullah arts and cultural leader film on the Thursday. On the Friday, we'll have 9 scholarly speakers talk about the impact of the rice industry of South Carolina, both before and after the Civil War, in the area of arts and culture, before the Civil War, right after the Civil War, and from World War II to the present. And then that night, we're going to have a ballet. A big ballet troupe's going to come in and feature the works of the Gullah artist Jonathan Green. And I'm waiting for Tim to say, 1 minute left, okay. And then the next day, of course, we're going to collaborate with the museum, and we're going to have a wonderful event where we have a breakfast and have a talk. And then that afternoon, we're going to have children singing on the lawn of the Kaminsky House, and with some lectures by some people who know about Gullah music. And then that evening, we're going to have a wonderful event with stories and Gullah folklore and more dance and song. And so it's just going to be a great time. But that's the kind of thing that we like to do, and we like to involve young people throughout that process in interviewing, in creating and then editing the material, and then being there to research the material. And we go out to sites. We meet with people in their homes. We met with a man who carves canes on the side of the road. It's just a lot of fun. So that's how we do it.
Great. Thank you so much. So I have the uncomfortable task of speaking for Susan, which I really don't want to do because she should be here. But she prepared so much really important information that should be shared. And so if you'll bear with me, I will share some of Susan's remarks. But also a little more just very quickly about Susan, and I'll sort of forfeit my turn if need, so we can keep going to some other, to the next round. But it is important to note also that, so Susan Feller, who is supposed to be here, is recently retired from the Oklahoma Department of Libraries, where she served as development officer. In addition to raising major funding for special initiatives, Susan also directed statewide projects relating to preserving and advancing cultural heritage of all types, including serving as the state coordinator for Oklahoma's IMLS-funded Connecting to Collections initiative. As an advocate for tribal cultural sovereignty, Susan has worked with IMLS-funded tribal initiatives since 2006. National programs under her direction include annual continuing education initiatives tailored to the specific needs of tribal cultures, as well as studies relating to the structure, activities, and needs of the nation's 519 tribal archives, libraries, and museums. And most recently, Susan directed and co-authored the Digital Inclusion in Native Nations report, which is, again, in the back of the room. So Susan had some comments on some of the good things that are happening. Of course, there are incredible challenges on tribal lands in Native country. But let me just share some of the bright spots that she wanted us to touch on today. So first, the FCC and other federal agencies recognize that the lack of broadband capacity in Indian country must be addressed. Progress is slow, but many advances have been made in the past 5 years. These same agencies also realize that once broadband capacity improves, the need for digital literacy programs increases significantly, and tribal libraries must be prepared to fulfill this growing demand. Second, with support from IMLS, the first ever study of digital inclusion needs of Native communities was conducted in 2014, and the resulting report is providing an action plan to help us systematically address issues, identify resources, and actively seek solutions. She is happy to report that one of the key action items will be realized this September when the first ever Digital Inclusion Summit will take place in Washington, D.C. The summit will bring together tribal librarians, funders, federal agencies, tribal leaders, and other stakeholders to begin the process of working together to ensure the best possible digital inclusion programs for Native communities. And then third, there is progress towards state library agencies becoming more engaged with tribal libraries. While Arizona, New Mexico, California, Oklahoma, and a few other state library agencies have long provided support for tribal libraries, others have not been as engaged. By providing access to training, helping with E-rate applications, providing access to interlibrary loans, sharing summer reading resources, and allowing tribal library patrons to access subscription databases, state library agencies have the potential to significantly assist tribal libraries. And I'll talk in a little bit about why these advances are so important given the tremendous need from the work that she's seen and done. So briefly, in whatever amount of time we have left, maybe 3 minutes, I want to share a little bit about what I see. I want to throw out some provocative sort of comments here with the little time that I have as an unfunded IMLS grantee. So maybe I can do that. Maybe that's going to hurt my chances in the future, but that's okay. That's okay. It's mid-afternoon. What I want to do is I want to propose sort of 2 ideas today that are not mine, but I want to amplify comments that I think are extremely important and help us to really think differently about digital literacy and inclusion. I want to propose the idea that the target audiences that we often think about when we are working within libraries and we're designing digital literacy and inclusion programs, they are already technology experts, okay, particularly in low-income communities. And I want to throw that out, building on work from Virginia Eubanks at the University of Albany, who has done extensive research with low-income women. She wrote a book called Digital Dead End, Fighting for Social Justice in the Information Age. She worked in a YWCA in Troy, Cohoes, New York, and found that actually in developing a digital literacy program and offering a digital literacy program, and expecting they would come, they didn't come, right? And so she realized that she was wrong, that all of her assumptions about people who lack skills, who don't have the skills that we hold up as these goals that we really want everyone to have because they are important, that actually there are other skills and really important skills, and the stories behind the skills as people survive every day around technology in ways that we don't often think about and consider, such as dealing with the welfare system in this country, and how engagement with technology actually makes a lot of the people that we consider to be people without technology skills actually technology experts. But do we spend the time to understand and listen to those stories deeply and carefully and closely to help us then develop programs based on those needs that we hear is a great contribution from her work. And I think there's a lot to be learned if we begin our programs not only by considering our patrons, our constituents, the target, the end users of our digital literacy programs as technology experts, but then inviting them both into the design, development, implementation, and evaluation of our digital literacy and inclusion programs is a very exciting way to engage digital literacy and inclusion. And then lastly, in the last minute I have, I also want to call attention to the Free Library Philadelphia. I was really honored that I had the opportunity to serve as an evaluator on a 2-year Knight Foundation grant, the Free Library Hotspots program, which was incredibly innovative. It allowed essentially embedded librarians within community organizations to promote digital literacy and inclusion. And it was an incredible engagement strategy. And one of the things that I found from my study was that actually what we know from the literature is that obviously comfort with technology is a really important outcome that we'd like to see people have at the end of our digital literacy programs. But what I actually found, that comfort before one engages with technology is extremely important. What does that mean? That libraries then play an incredible role in helping people to feel comfortable and invited, particularly when it's in partnership with a community-based organization like the Free Library Hotspots program did, that allowing people to feel safe, trusted, supported, and really connected to their anchor institution is the gateway towards technology literacy and training. And that was a really interesting finding that I wanted to share with you today. So I could talk more, but we will turn it over for a second round. And now we'd really like to talk about some of the challenges. We're going to combine sort of the challenges and recommendations with the time we have so we can open it up to a broader conversation. So
Could I hop in?
who would like to start?
Well, I wanted to play off of some of the things you
Great.
just said.
Thank you.
When you had mentioned about giving something and will they come, you know, the Sen and Kim study, one thing I liked about it is it did identify the disadvantaged, which they identified as ethnic minorities, recent immigrants, and people with disabilities. And they said the 3 obstacles that they identified, one of which you've touched upon, proximity deficiencies. You know, you can't assume that people will come, particularly in rural areas where transportation is a huge problem, but you have to go to them. And then the second thing is the poor relevancy of services and collections. If you don't get them to get folks to participate from the outset on planning, they may not come because they don't really consider it to be anything worthwhile. So it could be the content as well. And then the third thing was the lack of the continuous efforts, because people associate with people who they think are their friends. And so those are 3 things that I think the Sen and Kim, use and non-use of public libraries in the information age, and I'll leave off the rest of it, does a good job of talking about. We got 2 Smart Investing at Your Library grants from the FINRA Foundation. And the second one was a 2-year project, and we worked with the Human Services Collaborative of Georgetown County, a group that the Francis Bunnell Foundation had brought together agencies that deal with the housing and other needs of the most disadvantaged of the community. The idea, how do you break the cycle of poverty? How do you change root behaviors? And we actually had people from each one of the agency's group of patrons to be on a committee to help us to outline things that would be of interest to them at the outset. And then we were able to use what they had proposed and actually put that in a proposal for FINRA, kind of like what Allison had recommended. But again, this was a group of the very neediest people. And so from that, we had really good response. And we went, of course, to the centers that they were accustomed to going to. We always tried to provide a lot of food. And that's one thing that I wish that federal programs would permit us to do, if that could ever be changed, to feed people, because they love it. They love it. And with the Gullah program that we did, we paid through the Friends of the Library for Gullah food to be made available. We had a lot of people come, a lot of even non-Gullah people, when they learned about the food. They came and they really enjoyed it. So those are a couple of the things. So playing off of you, I'm not going to...
I'm just smiling because when you said food, I always teach my students that my area of research is motivation. And so I always tell them that if they want to motivate, and this is school library students, if they want to motivate the teachers in their schools to come to their training or whatever they're going to have in the library, make sure you have food, because they will come, and they do. Yeah, well, another area of my research, and it has to do with motivation, is in the area of innovation. And I started looking at, this will relate, promise. I started looking at adult inventors and what they did, how they did it, and why they did it. And I got really interested in not how they started. And many of them started as children with ideas and pursuing those ideas, even when other kids may not have thought it was very cool, or parents may have not thought it was a very good idea. So then I started looking at child innovators, kids who want to do things that are out of the box. But how do they do that, and who supports them, and what allows them to succeed or not succeed? And one of the things that I found was that they had a strong mentor in their life, either a parent, a teacher, someone. And by the way, it was rarely the librarian, okay, which was a signal that went off in my mind immediately. But anyway, one of the things we also found out was that the kids who usually participate in those kinds of activities are also rarely from an underrepresented group. They're rarely minorities. They're rarely kids with disabilities. And so this is now my new passion, to try to find out how, first of all, librarians can serve as mentors to the kids who don't have mentors, in terms of encouraging their creativity and innovation and their ideas, and to follow their passions. There's so many kids who don't have that person in their life to help them do that. So one of the things I was going to recommend to IMLS, if I may be so bold, is to make sure that in your RFP, that those who submit proposals think about people with disabilities in particular, and how they can make sure that what they're doing is going to be accessible and inclusive to all people. So one of the ways of doing that is to incorporate universal design for learning principles into their project deliverables. Universal design are those principles that guide us in terms of facilities design, how far apart, for example, tables should be in libraries so that wheelchairs can get through, how high tables should be so people with braces or who have other kinds of mobility issues can sit at a table or bring a wheelchair to a table. And universal design for learning principles have to do with how we design learning deliverables, such as even a website. Is the font large enough? Is the background color and the color of the font, is there enough contrast so that people with visual disabilities can actually see what's on that site? People with hearing disabilities, is there alternative to videos, alternative transcript for videos? Things like that. We don't normally think about those things, but they keep other people from participating in what we produce. So I would suggest that maybe IMLS put in their proposal RFPs, all of them, that those who submit a proposal do address UD and UDL principles in their project deliverables.
Great. Yep, thank you, Ruth. And we'll turn it over to Dwight for his
I'd like to play
recommendations,
off
and then
of
we'll
him.
open it up to the audience.
Ruth's ideas are so exciting. And when she mentioned the idea about the right kids are not coming, I mean, that's so true. The privileged can so easily be there, and we're glad to be working with the privileged as well. But the right kids aren't coming. And I think one thing that I would agree with you on and disagree with you on at the same time is librarians being mentors. Yes and no. I think we have the opportunity to not reinvent, to avoid reinventing the wheel by having the IMLS, and this is a recommendation, really emphasize partnerships. Now, not formal partnerships that cut potential partners out budgetarily. You know, that's sometimes the case. I think people need to be paid if they're going to be helping us. But people who already have connections, people who are already friends of the kids that we really would like to see. And again, you can think of the whole list of people who already are mentors of poor, rural, isolated kids. So I won't go into that, but I think that's the key thing. The next thing is I would encourage the IMLS and the profession as a whole to try to get the right kind of people in our field. And what I'd say is get passionate, asymmetrical people. You know, I don't think we need people who can do everything. And we don't need people who are self-satisfied. We need people who are edgy. We need people who are passionate. We need people who are fiery. And we need people who have a real special skill. If that skill is working well with people, that's great. If it's doing editing of videos, that's great. If it's working with technology, with teams, that's great. They need to be edgy individuals. And again, you're going to have some administrators that can corral the cats. But at the same time, that's what I think we need. And so the next committee, the next group, I hope we'll talk about that some. And I hope the IMLS will make that happen.
Great. So with the time that we have left, we'd like to open this up to you all and to respond to any of the points that we've talked about today, but also additional ideas, recommendations for other approaches to funding digital literacy and inclusion, particularly those that have community-wide or community-based approaches.
Hi, I'm Megas Ramaniam, and I'm from the University of Maryland. So one of the things that I see as a clear need is training librarians in terms of digital literacy pedagogy. That's an area that I see is extremely needed. I work with young adults from Title I schools, and let me tell you, their digital literacy skills is pretty dismal. The way they assess credibility of information is just, I'm just in awe when I see them assessing credibility of information. And I think I know what the reason is the way that we teach digital literacy in schools, in libraries. One of our most treasured thing in schools and also in other libraries is our databases, right? So we encourage our young people to use these databases. But when they need information, where do they go to? They go to Google and Google information, and it gives you a lot of information, and they don't know what type of information they should trust and how can they aggregate all the information that they are seeing. So I think that's one of the need that I do see in terms of digital literacy is we need to re-envision how we teach digital literacy.
Can I just comment on that? It isn't just Google, it's also Wikipedia. One of the questions we asked these young innovators was, how do you find the information you need to be successful as an inventor? And one child wrote that he asked his father was his mentor, and his father, he said, one of the things that we teach young innovators is to use the patent office, the U.S. Patent Office database to find out whether a particular invention has already been invented. That's what should be taught. His father, however, had a better idea. He said, we're going down to the drugstore and we're going to pick up every current magazine on the shelves, and we'll look through it. And if we find what you want to invent there, then we know it's already been invented. And if we don't, we can go ahead. So, you know, it's funny, but it isn't funny, because we need digital literacy for parents too, I guess. But I think there's a definite lack of digital literacy understanding in kids of all levels.
Greg Michaels, Madison Public Library. You mentioned earlier about digital divide, but I didn't hear a whole lot of conversation about this. I don't know if this is a question or more of a rant on my part, but I look at Susan's report where only 30% of the tribal have access to the internet. We face a lot of the similar problems in certain sections of the city of Madison. You think everybody would have access to internet, but it doesn't happen. Your program in Philadelphia providing the free hotspots, rural Wisconsin, another major issue. The companies don't find it profitable to provide internet access. How do we gain access with those barriers in place? I mean, there's a monopoly on who provides access. You look at countries around the world. Sweden, you can get a gig access for $25 a month. You know, why can't we achieve that in the United States?
Yes. Well, well, let me just tell you. Well, I think one of the exciting initiatives, as many people know about the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, was an incredible initiative, unprecedented, to increase access to infrastructure across the United States. That was successful. I don't have the numbers in front of me to tell you sort of the impact of that, but one of the things that I want to stress is that while there has been actually a lot of funding for promoting infrastructure, a lot less money has been set aside for what you do once you have access. And so digital literacy, so yes, and I think that's a real credit to the IMLS Building Digital Communities Report as they define digital inclusion as they had, that the first part of that is access, and then the second part is really the adoption. And you can't have adoption without access. But I think that, again, libraries and trying to understand the role of libraries in promoting digital inclusion, access, I've been arguing that actually we might be able to understand adoption in different ways by understanding adoption outside of the home. Because if some communities simply aren't going to get access in the ways that you have outlined here, that we need to understand other ways that adoption is meaningful for those populations.
And Colin, could I chime in here too? Sorry, just IMLS, Greg, in response to your question, IMLS is part of an interagency. There's 25, 26 agencies that are part of the new White House Broadband Opportunity Council. Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking at, because there's not this big flood of money out there now, so we are looking at policies that we have within our agencies that might be utilized to help deploy broadband around. So, and I would encourage you to go back to your communities and talk to your city managers, talk to people, about, do you have a dig once policy? So if you're trenching for plumbing, a new sewer system, can you lay conduit for broadband? So we're hoping we'll have a report, I think it's due out August 27th to the president. And so we're hoping that can push this forward too.
Just wanted to add, in southern Georgetown, South Carolina, there are about 4,000 people that don't have internet access. The lines just aren't there. If we put a library in that portion of the county, they have to put a line in. And so that's what we're aiming to do. It may take us 5 years, but again, it's the idea of librarians themselves can create, through attention to proximity, exactly what you're talking about. We've established 2 of our libraries right beside schools as well, in one area that's fairly wealthy, but where kids are going to come from the poor areas because that's kind of the central place that they all show up, and then the other in the poorest area of our county, where the kids can just flood over every day, and they do, and fill up the library after school. So proximity is important.
Hi, this is Jill Kastek from Portland State University. I thank you for having this topic on the agenda, digital literacy and inclusion. And I just want to mention and point out the very obvious connection that we are in Kansas City. And this is one of the most progressive communities in thinking about digital inclusion, Google Fiber, and some of the ways that the digital inclusion networks and opportunities are starting to pervade these kinds of communities. And so I encourage us very strongly, I know there's many experts in the room on this topic, but to look at the community around us and look at the efforts that are being put forth toward digital inclusion through organizations like Connect for Good and others, so that we're having these community-based institutions as a part and parcel of examining our own practice and our own impact.
Crosby danced in his seat.
Good, I can get two. Why don't you give one to Chepto? So I'm the director of the Kansas City Public Library. We're dealing with Google Fiber. We have Google Fiber in this library, you'll be happy to know. And you're exactly right. There is a large strategy. My deputy director, Chepto Kosatan Buckner, wave Chepto, is in charge of our digital inclusion efforts, is on the National Digital Inclusion Task Force. Is that, I got that right? And I'm involved, we're both involved with Shelby, the schools, hospitals, libraries, and broadband, et cetera. But you're exactly right. One of the issues here is you look at this building, which cost us about $30 million to renovate, or our Plaza Library, our big branch, which cost about $15 million, or our regular branches, which cost anywhere from $5 to $10 million. We need to think about our outreach in different terms. And what Siobhan Reardon's doing in Philadelphia, and I believe there's a large citywide venture in Philadelphia, what Chicago's doing, Seattle's doing, et cetera, is pushing all this technology out in ways with things like mobile hotspots. And one of our ideas is to do more wired locations, but smaller branch locations that are partnering. You mentioned Connecting for Good, which is a great organization started in Kansas City, Kansas. A guy named Michael Amato is part of our team. Here, we're working with the Housing Authority in Kansas City. We're working with the adult literacy organization, Literacy KC. We could go on down the road, and the city itself. And the city's kind of bumping along on this, and we're pushing this. But it's actually not that expensive. We're really focused, and I've tried to reorient Shelby on this. We're really focused on the connection to the individual home. It's one of the reasons I said what I said at the very beginning in my welcome about the 70% of kids in the Kansas City School District not having a connection at home, the 40% of the kids in the school district who have at least 2 addresses during the school year, and you think about public housing, you think about breakdown of the family. We need to think in terms of anchor institutions, the library being the primary institution, it seems to me, but lots of others, public housing, our community centers, which are the Parks Department in Kansas City, partnering with us to move not just, and the other point that's been made in this discussion, which is exactly right, not just in getting access. Access is a start. You have to, one of the things that Michael Lamott in Connecting for Good does so well, better than the library does right now, is training people how to use the devices and actually starting out by explaining to them why the devices are so important, why the connection to the internet is so important. Because a big percentage of the people, that 20% in a city like Kansas City, of people who don't have a connection because they don't really understand why it's important. And we can tell them about job searching. We can tell them about healthcare information. We can tell them about advancing their educational credentials, et cetera. But you have to start there, it seems to me. And libraries are the center of this, but we can't look at it in terms of our connection in a large branch, and we need to look at what we do for people who are probably never going to be connected at home, at least in the lifetime of anybody in this room.
Well, and I also just wanted to just quickly add, also since John Horgan is in the room, really we have him to thank. Also, I think it's a public shout out to understanding some of the barriers to adoption and for home broadband adoption. And that's incredibly important as we try to tackle issues of access. And so it's just thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Buentham with the Association of Research Libraries in Washington, D.C., and my question is for Ruth, but really for anybody else in the room. I'm delighted to hear about the work around accessibility, and ARL has most recently, fairly recently, really been engaged in this conversation, particularly with respect to accessibility of digital content and trying to push the marketplace and force vendors to be a little bit more nimble and allow their content to be more accessible, but also in creating collaborations to make analog content more accessible to more people as well. But my question is, this is all from the user perspective, and what we're trying to initiate is a conversation about accessibility around the workforce issue. That is, given there's another explosion of a demographic explosion is also the number of people that have both physical and cognitive disabilities in the United States. And so my question is, are conversations, I was going to do some research about this, but since I have a group of experts in the room, why not ask you? Are there conversations happening around recruitment of people with disabilities into our workforce and accommodating them, finding appropriate roles for them in whatever capacity, as advisory capacities, as professionals in our organizations? What do we need to do? If it's not happening, what do we need to do to initiate that conversation?
Ruth, did you want to say?
I don't know if I'm capable of answering that question. I've seen some evidence of it when I was at the State Library of Illinois. I saw some people, I heard some people there talking about that issue, but I don't know about the research or any of the more of a national level effort. So maybe someone else in the room does know that. Sorry.
Maybe one basic need, again, is just through the simple collaboration between the local Board of Disabilities and Special Needs in the library. Because, for instance, we have had 2 long-term disabled individuals as library shelvers, as library pagers. One is autistic, but he is super with numbers. You know, he can walk by a display case and he'll look at it and say, that's the same calendar as in 1938, you know, and he just knows. And so even if it's on that level initially, to try to bring some people in.
So 30 seconds. So we have been given money by a local foundation to work with an internet startup that has an online app for folks with disabilities to pre-qualify them for library jobs. I'd be happy to pass that information along to anybody.
Great.
Colin, would it be okay with you? Sandy had her hand up earlier.
Yes.
To let her say the final. Sandy Tharp from
Please.
Iowa Tribe. Okay.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sandy Tharp. I'm the librarian for the Iowa Tribe. And I was hoping that you all listened to what Susan said that Colin shared. And I just wanted to share my story just a little bit. When I walked into this beautiful place this morning, I almost cried because it was so big. My library is very small. In 2009, I found out I had no budget and no money. And my library is very similar to what most tribal libraries face. And there's 566 federally recognized tribes across the nation. And a lot of them don't have tribal libraries. And it makes me very sad that so many state agencies don't work with tribes. Had it not been for the Oklahoma State Library, I would not have even had any new children's books in my library. I had 150 used books. But IMLS, they were my first real money for my library. It was $7,000. But we offer a GED program. We just finished a program where we put laptops with homebound elders and teaching them how to use online health resources. It was very effective. But when I had to pick up the laptops, the elders could not afford internet at their house. It cost $60 a month. So, and my children do not have computers at home. They don't have smartphones. So I just hope if you're from a state and that state agency does not support tribal libraries, I hope you'll call them, and I hope IMLS will create some incentives to have them work with tribal libraries. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sandy. I want to thank the speakers. Thank you to Susan, who couldn't be here, and thank all of you. Thank you very much.